The air hangs heavy with the acrid smell of smoke. Buildings, once homes and havens, are reduced to rubble. The echoes of distant gunfire mingle with the cries of children, their innocence shattered by the brutal realities of war. This is the landscape of intervention, a scene tragically familiar in many corners of the world. Peacekeeping forces, often clad in the blue helmets of the United Nations, patrol the streets, attempting to restore order and provide a semblance of security. But beneath the surface of this humanitarian facade lies a complex web of political motivations, economic interests, and strategic calculations. The notion of military intervention for humanitarian purposes has become increasingly prevalent in the post-Cold War era. From Somalia to Bosnia, Afghanistan to Iraq, powerful nations have justified military action in the name of protecting civilians, upholding human rights, and promoting democracy. These interventions are often presented as acts of altruism, a moral imperative to alleviate suffering and defend the defenseless. However, as Noam Chomsky argues in his incisive critique, The New Military Humanism Lessons from Kosovo, the reality is far more nuanced and often deeply troubling. Chomsky, a renowned political activist, linguist, and social critic, challenges the dominant narrative surrounding humanitarian interventions, exposing the hypocrisy and double standards that underpin them. He argues that the new military humanism is a dangerous ideology that masks the pursuit of self-interest behind a veil of moral righteousness. Chomsky contends that military interventions, while sometimes presented as necessary evils, are often driven by a desire to maintain global dominance, secure strategic resources, and advance geopolitical agendas. The book focuses on the NATO intervention in Kosovo in 1999, a pivotal event that epitomizes the complexities and contradictions of humanitarian intervention. Chomsky meticulously dissects the historical context, the justifications presented by Western powers, and the consequences of the intervention, both intended and unintended. He argues that the Kosovo intervention, while ostensibly aimed at preventing ethnic cleansing by Serbian forces, was in fact motivated by a desire to consolidate NATO's dominance in the region and assert Western power on the world stage. Chomsky highlights the selective nature of humanitarian intervention, questioning why certain crises elicit a swift and decisive response from the international community, while others are met with indifference or neglect. He argues that the decision to intervene is rarely based on the severity of the humanitarian crisis alone, but is instead influenced by a complex interplay of political, economic, and strategic considerations. The Kosovo intervention, Chomsky argues, was not driven by a genuine concern for the plight of Kosovar Albanians, but rather by a desire to project Western power and contain the perceived threat of a defiant Serbia. To illustrate this point, Chomsky draws parallels between the Kosovo intervention and other humanitarian crises that received a vastly different response from the international community. He points to the Rwandan genocide in 1994, where nearly 1 million people were slaughtered while the world stood by, and the Indonesian occupation of East Timor, which resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of civilians, as stark examples of selective intervention. In both cases, Chomsky argues, the absence of strategic interests and the lack of political will allowed atrocities to unfold on a massive scale. Chomsky argues that the media plays a crucial role in perpetuating the myth of humanitarian intervention. He contends that the media, often complicit in the agendas of powerful states, presents a sanitized and one-sided narrative that reinforces the perception of Western benevolence and obscures the true motivations behind military action. Chomsky argues that the media's coverage of the Kosovo intervention was characterized by a lack of critical scrutiny, a reliance on official sources, and a tendency to demonize the enemy while glorifying the actions of Western powers. This selective reporting, Chomsky argues, creates a climate of public opinion that makes it difficult to challenge the legitimacy of military intervention. The media's portrayal of humanitarian crises often relies on simplistic narratives that emphasize the suffering of innocent victims, while downplaying the role of Western foreign policy in creating or exacerbating these crises. Chomsky argues that this selective morality, this tendency to apply different standards to different conflicts, is a hallmark of the new military humanism. Section 5. Echoes of Inaction, Rwanda and East Timor. The Rwandan genocide stands as a chilling testament to the selective nature of humanitarian intervention. In 1994, over a span of just 100 days, an estimated 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus were systematically slaughtered by Hutu extremists. The world watched in horror as the genocide unfolded, yet there was no military intervention to stop the killing. The United States, under the Clinton administration, actively resisted efforts to intervene, downplaying the scale of the genocide and blocking UN peacekeeping reinforcements. Similarly, the Indonesian occupation of East Timor, which began in 1975, resulted in the deaths of an estimated 100,000 to 250,000 East Timorese civilians. The Indonesian military, armed and supported by the United States, carried out a brutal campaign of repression, targeting civilians with extrajudicial killings, torture, and forced disappearances. Despite widespread condemnation from the international community, there was no military intervention to halt the violence. Section 6. The price of intervention, impact on Kosovo. Chomsky argues that even in cases where military intervention is successful in achieving its stated objectives, it often comes at a high cost to the civilian population. He contends that the use of military force, even for humanitarian purposes, inevitably results in civilian casualties, displacement, and long-term instability. Chomsky argues that the NATO bombing of Serbia, while presented as a necessary measure to stop ethnic cleansing, caused significant civilian casualties and widespread destruction of infrastructure. Moreover, Chomsky argues that the intervention had the unintended consequence of exacerbating ethnic tensions in Kosovo, leading to a wave of revenge attacks against Serbs and other minorities. He contends that the intervention, rather than creating a more peaceful and democratic society, sowed the seeds for future conflict and instability. Section 7. A call to critical consciousness. The new Military Humanism Lessons from Kosovo is a powerful indictment of the hypocrisy and double standards that often underpin foreign policy decisions. Chomsky's analysis of the Kosovo intervention serves as a cautionary tale, urging readers to critically examine the justifications presented for military action, and to question the motives of those who claim to be acting in the name of humanitarianism. Chomsky argues that citizens have a moral obligation to hold their leaders accountable for their actions, and to demand a foreign policy based on diplomacy, respect for international law, and a genuine commitment to human rights. Section 8. Chomsky's enduring relevance. Chomsky's work remains as relevant today as it was when it was first published. In an era marked by ongoing conflicts, humanitarian crises, and the rise of nationalist sentiment, Chomsky's insights into the nature of power, the role of media, and the dangers of selective morality are essential reading for anyone seeking to understand the complexities of the modern world. His work serves as a reminder that the pursuit of peace and justice requires more than just military might. It demands critical thinking, ethical reflection, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. Section 9. Towards an ethical foreign policy. The new Military Humanism, Lessons from Kosovo, is not just a critique of past mistakes, but a call to action. Chomsky challenges us to envision and advocate for a more just and equitable world order, one where military intervention is a last resort, not a default option. He urges us to demand a foreign policy grounded in diplomacy, respect for human rights, and a commitment to addressing the root causes of conflict such as poverty, inequality, and political oppression. Chomsky's work is a testament to the power of critical thought and the importance of dissent in a democratic society. It is a call to engage in informed and ethical debate about the use of military force and to strive for a world where peace is not just the absence of war, but the presence of justice.